Hello and welcome to Hustle to Achieve, where we talk about concepts, news, and insights from the world of finance, business, and investing. Today, we are going to talk about a topic that is creating waves in the world of finance: the rise of the BRICS economies and their potential to challenge the US dollar as the global reserve currency. But first, it's important for us to understand what a global reserve currency is. So let's start from the basics. A global reserve currency is a currency that is held in significant quantities by the governments around the world so that they can settle transactions and maintain and manage their foreign exchange reserves. For much of the 20th century and even up until now, the US dollar has remained a dominant global reserve currency. But it isn't the only reserve currency that has ever existed. In the past, there have been 6 major reserve currencies since the 1450s. Some of those currencies were the Dutch guilder, Spanish silver, dollar, the British pound, and the French franc. The average lifespan of these currencies have been 94 years. The rise and fall of a global reserve currency depends on various factors. Some of those factors are political stability, economic and military strength, technological innovation, and in the recent times, especially in the case of the US dollar, its ability to purchase oil. Over the last few years, there has been a growing push by some countries to move away from the US dollar and look into other currencies such as the euro, the Chinese yuan, and even Bitcoin. So now that we have understood what the basics are of a global reserve currency, let us now understand as to why we need a global reserve currency in the first place. So there are 3 reasons as to why we need a global reserve currency. Number 1, it facilitates international trade and commerce because it provides a common medium of exchange. So let's say, for example, a company based in Japan wants to purchase oil from, let's say, Saudi Arabia. If it has US dollars, it can directly use those dollars and purchase oil from Saudi Arabia instead of having to exchange their yen to Saudi riyals. The second reason is that a global reserve currency provides stability in exchange rates so that other countries can avoid sudden volatility in the markets. So when other countries use a global reserve currency, for example, let's say in this case, the US dollar, they can bypass all the fluctuations that are happening or that are taking place in their own currencies or the currencies that they want to trade in. This is one of the most important reasons as to why there is a need for a global reserve currency. There's yet another reason, which is the third reason, which is also very important, which is equally important. And that is that a global reserve currency acts or provides a safe haven for countries to park their investments. So for context, in this case, let us take the example of the US dollars. Countries that are using the US dollars or that have foreign exchange reserves that are made up of the US dollars, they're not entirely using those funds up. So what they do is they invest that money, the US dollars, into the US economy, specifically in US treasuries. And that in turn provides them a good investment opportunity. As of January 2023, countries that are holding the US dollars as their foreign exchange reserves now own up to $7.4 trillion in US treasuries, which makes up about 24% of the total US debt. So these are the reasons as to why we need a global reserve currency. Now that we've understood as to why we need a global reserve currency, let us now talk about the rise of the US dollar and go back in time. So after the First World War, the US economy strengthened and so did the US dollar, which then rose into dominance. This was later cemented by the Bretton Woods Agreement of 1944, which officially confirmed the US dollar as a global reserve currency. And not only did it confirm the strength of the US dollar as a dominant global reserve currency, but it also pegged the US dollar to gold at a fixed rate of about $35 an ounce. So now the US dollar's value was pegged to gold at $35 an ounce, and the value of the other currencies or other major players who were at that point of time present at the Bretton Woods conference were now tied to the US dollar. So what that simply meant was that the value of the US dollar was pegged to gold, and the value of other currencies that were present at the Bretton Woods conference were measured in terms of the US dollar. If any country wanted to purchase gold, they had to have US dollars in order to make the purchase. However, the Bretton Woods Agreement began to unravel in 1960s when the US government ran trade deficits, large trade deficits, and also the cost of the Vietnam War grew. As a result, the US dollar started to print more money, more than what it had gold for to back them up. What that led to was high rates of inflation and, as a result, a decline in value of the US dollar.
I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to take the action necessary to defend the dollar against the speculators. I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States.
By 1971, the situation was so uncontrollable that the then US President Richard Nixon had to abandon the gold standard. He announced the end of the Bretton Woods Agreement on August 15, 1971. This meant that the US dollar was no longer pegged to the value of gold, and other countries could no longer exchange their dollars for gold. Even after the collapse of the Bretton Woods Agreement, US dollar remained as a global reserve currency. However, this time its value was not pegged to gold. It was determined by the market forces of demand and supply, which meant it was exposed to a greater level of volatility. In the immediate aftermath of the Bretton Woods Agreement, the value of the US dollar plummeted in comparison to other major currencies. And as a result of this, inflation in the US soared. Over the longer term, US trade deficit grew and US had to depend on other countries. Soon after the collapse of the Bretton Woods Agreement, the Smithsonian Agreement took place in 1971. This was an agreement that took place between G10 nations of the International Monetary Fund. The whole purpose of this agreement was to adjust the exchange rates and bring stability in the international financial system. It is important for us to know that the value of the US dollar under this agreement was reduced by 8 to 8.5%, and the value of other major currencies like the Japanese yuan and the German Deutschmark was revalued. Also, the value of the US dollar was now pegged at a rate of $38 an ounce, which was up from the previous rate of $35 an ounce. The Smithsonian Agreement of 1971 was an attempt to revive the Bretton Woods Agreement in some way or form. However, this agreement also failed to do so, and it only lasted for about 15 months. Soon after the collapse of the Bretton Woods Agreement, the US shook hands with Saudi Arabia to establish the Petrodollar system. Under this system, the oil trading countries agreed to price their oil in US dollars, and in exchange, the US government agreed to provide protection to Saudi Arabia and other major oil exporting nations from foreign aggression. The petrodollar system strengthened the role of the US dollar as world's dominant reserve currency, as other countries needed US dollars to purchase oil. It also provided the US government with a significant advantage in global trade, as they financed trade deficits through the issuance of US treasuries. This is where it gets interesting. Now, a new contender has emerged: the Petroyuan. China and Russia have collaborated to push the Chinese yuan to challenge the dominance of the US dollar. In 2018, China launched its yuan-denominated oil futures trading on the Shanghai International Energy Exchange. After the Western sanctions on Russia due to its invasion of Ukraine in 2022, Russia has found it difficult to sell oil to the Western countries. And since then, it has heavily dependent on its southern neighbor to sell its oil. China has also emerged as a significant importer of oil, especially Russian oil. In just the first 2 months of 2023, China imported around $9.3 billion worth of Russian oil. In fact, it even broke its own record by importing 2 million barrels of Russian crude oil, surpassing the total imports in dollar value in 2022. Also, over 70% of transactions taking place between Russia and China are now being settled in their respective local currencies. that are yuan and rubles. This number was only 30% just a year ago. Now it's important for us to also talk about and throw some light on the BRICS economies and the developments that are taking place around the BRICS nations. BRICS include Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa. And together they are working to create a global financial system that challenges the dominance of the US dollar. They are now in talks of creating a BRICS currency which can be used to trade or settle transactions among these BRICS nations. Just recently, BRICS nations also surpassed the G7 nations in global GDP. BRICS nations, or the 5 nations of the BRICS economy, now collectively contribute 31.5% to the global GDP as compared to 30.5% which is contributed by the G7 nations. As per reports, China and Brazil have also decided to ditch the US dollar and trade in their local currencies, the yuan and real. This move comes as a wider push to expand the trade relations between these two countries. And with this agreement, these two countries aim to settle transactions in their local currencies, thereby reducing the risk of being dependent on the US dollar. This agreement is also now being seen as a major push towards de-dollarization. The Brazil-China deal is just one example of countries seeking to move away from the US dollar. Iran and Saudi Arabia recently restored their ties after 7 years, and the facilitator, China. This is also a significant move because Saudi Arabia is one of the largest exporters of oil in the whole world, and it exclusively used to trade in US dollars. The trend towards de-dollarization is growing as more and more countries are wanting to reduce their dependence on the US dollar. And the BRICS nations are playing a key role in this trend. Countries within this bloc are now seeking to trade in their own currencies so that they can altogether bypass the US dollar. The rise of Petroyuan has also contributed to this trend. As we discussed earlier, Petroyuan system allows for other countries to use yuan to purchase oil. So now they have to depend less and less on the US dollars, and they now can hold less and less of US dollar reserves. As more countries adopt the Petroyuan system, US dollar's dominance as a global reserve currency will be challenged further. It is also worth noting that despite all these significant agreements taking place, US dollar still remains a dominant global reserve currency. Almost 60% of foreign exchange is still held in the US dollars. And although the role of Chinese yuan has grown to 2.8% in global reserves, there is still a long way to go for China and the Chinese yuan as a major global currency. While it is unlikely that the BRICS nations will collectively replace the US dollar as the global reserve currency, it is worth noting that these nations are pushing forward towards a more balanced global financial system. And even if US dollar's position as a dominant global reserve currency gets challenged, it will take years, if not decades, for us to see that happening. Despite the efforts of the BRICS nations and other currencies to reduce their dependence on the US dollar is still a major force in global trade and finance. And US dollar is going to be a major player and a dominant global reserve currency for at least some time. What do you think? Do you think that Russia and China or BRICS nations collectively will create a new currency that will challenge the dominance of the US dollar, or will the US dollar remain a dominant global reserve currency for decades to come? Please let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this video valuable, please like and share it with your friends. And please do subscribe to our YouTube channel and all the channels that are mentioned in the link below. Thank you.